Hey guys, I'm here today with some old school tech. What I have here is my ZC wiring harness, which is essentially the same as a 4th Gen Civic Si harness, and I'm going to modify it to run a VTEC motor. So, welcome to VTEC Academy. You're about to get schooled. We have our VTEC motor that we decided to put in Project Backmarker, but what's important here is the wiring harness. Let's say you have an SI, or let's say you have a ZC and you want to convert it over to VTEC. Well, there's going to be some things you have to add. At a minimum, you're going to have to add Vtec Solenoid. That's if you can run P28 ECU. Now, if you're running originally OBD0 in your car, the other thing you're going to have to add is a 4-wire O2 sensor. But we're going to go ahead and do the whole thing. We're going to add 4-wire O2 sensor, we're going to add Vtec Solenoid, Vtec Oil Pressure, NOx sensor, and we're going to add the Obd-1 distributor plugs. So let's get started. This is my harness I converted for ZC. If you recall, in an earlier episode, I changed it over to port injection, also added another sensor for the distributor, and then I decided, hey, let's not put a ZC in it, let's put a VTEC motor in it. So now I have to add more stuff. Now luckily, when I did the car, I added a few extra wires because I knew at some point I was probably going to put a VTEC motor in, but what I hadn't done was modify the engine harness itself. So I taped it all up nicely, it's all ready to go, but now I have to untape it so I can make some changes. So anyway, let's take a quick look at the engine where I kind of discuss all the modifications I need to make to the harness. This is the engine that's going in budget EDF. This is a 1992 B17 from a Acura GSR. So I've decided to go ahead and use this because the cable transmission is compatible with our car because of course we have a cable clutch. With this engine going in, I'm going to have to make some changes to the harness. Originally I built this harness for a ZC, so there's some differences I need to take care of. To start off with, let's look at the distributor plugs. This plug only has 5 wires. And of course, this is a power and tack. That's going to match there. But this has 7 wires. So what's happening is there is a sensor that's on the front of the motor that's now going to be moved to the back of the motor. So if I can find the connector for that. Yep, right there. That 2-pin sensor is on the front of the ZC motor. So I'm going to bring that back and wire it into here and then change these plugs over to the Obd-1 style plugs. Another thing while I'm there is up front, my transmission uses a different type of connector. It has a rectangular gray connector, whereas on the EF it uses 2 bullet connectors. That's for the reverse lights. Next up there is the water temp and the for the gauge and the water temp for the ECU. Both those connectors are the same, don't have to make any changes there. But there are some missing plugs. Now that I have a Vtec Solenoid, I'm going to have to add single wire Vtec Solenoid, and I'm going to have to add Vtec Oil Pressure. If I am able to find a 92, 93 GSR ECU to run this, I'm going to want the Vtec Oil Pressure. That's necessary as part of running this car. And I would like to kind of keep it legal for emissions. And easiest way to do that is use a 92, 93 Integra GSR ECU. All right, so moving around to more Vtec sensors, we have right here the NOx sensor. It's tucked way up underneath here. That's a single wire. I'm going to have to add that as well. I hadn't put on my injector plug yet because I wasn't sure what injectors I was running. I am going to now run some injectors that do not use the resistor, so I'll go ahead and put those up and get those connectors on. Next, let's address this right here. This is a pair of bullet connectors that go on your radiator fan switch. Now, on an OBD0 car like CRX, that switch is on the back of the block here. Now it's been moved over here. It's this little round connector right here. That round connector uses a different style plug. Same kind of plug you find on the NOx sensor, the same kind of plug you find on the idle air control valve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring these wires back and then put the correct plug on there for that. Another problem here is my alternator. Now I could go and look for a 9091 alternator and bolt it in place here. That would work just fine. That way I wouldn't have to change this connector. But at some point later on, I'm probably going to wind up going to a newer B18C. So I'm going to go ahead now and change this connector out for the rectangular style one that goes with this particular alternator. But otherwise, the wires reach nicely. Size-wise, everything pretty much reaches with the exception of this. This is the oil pressure idiot light. It's just a bullet connector. Somebody has removed the oil pressure sensor and put a fitting here. Obviously, they had a remote oil pressure sensor. I think it was for a gauge cluster. I'm going to go ahead and put the oil pressure sensor back there, and then I'm going to probably lengthen this about 3 inches so that when I have the wiring harness all tucked up underneath the manifold nice and neat, it'll be able to reach down there. ECV plug is the same, so no problem there. The intake air temperature sensor is the same on this particular manifold that's over here on this end runner, so it reaches without any problem. So just really a few modifications I have to do. So I'm going to get to that. By the way, I already wired the car for each one of those things, so that all that stuff is existing and is the right color. So it should be fairly easy for me to just go ahead and add the few wires I need to on the harness with the right connector, and I'll be good to go. So with that, I'm going to take this home, open it up on my bench, go ahead and make the necessary changes, and get this thing back on the motor so we can get it in the car. I have the harness here in front of me. We're going to be adding knock sensor, Vtec Solenoid, Vtec Oil Pressure, a four-wire O2 sensor, which is the addition of one single wire. So our 4 wires are those. Some of the other modifications I have to do is I need to change my distributor plug. This has 2 of the sensor wires in it, plus my tachometer and my coil power. This was the top dead center sensor that wound up getting added. That helps synchronize injectors. That needs to be brought back over to this plug. Then it's going to have to be traded for a Obd-1 style plug. My coil power and tachometer, that too is going to get converted over to an Obd-1 style. Then of course I'm going to add over here the Vtec Oil Pressure and Vtec Solenoid. Then back here to the Radiator Fan Switch. That's going to be pulled back to this point right here, and a round plug is going to be added for that, for where the Radiator Fan Switch is on the motor, over by the thermostat housing. And let's see what else. Knock sensor is going to get added. These are the backup lights. This is for the reverse lights. That plug is going to need to be changed to a 2-wire gray plug as well, because our transmission reverse switch has a small gray plug with 2 pins rather than these 2 bullet connectors. This is the O2 sensor. It comes around to the front of the motor. This is going to have to be brought around to the back side of the motor, and then of course turned into a 4-wire O2 sensor rather than 2-wire. So let's get started on it all. First thing first, I need to strip off the old tape. Okay, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to peel back the sensor wires for my TDC sensor, and I'm also going to peel back the O2 sensor wire. These need to come back at least to here. The O2 sensor wire can, from here, extend down to the O2 sensor, and of course this then needs to be routed up to right here so it can join this connector here that we are using for our distributor. Now I'm cutting all the split loom where it was taped, or where the split is, so to speak. That way I can reuse it later on. I'll just peel the old tape off and reuse it. Most of this was a new split loom I just put on for my harness anyway. Okay, we now have all our distributor wires bunched together, so we can change those plugs in a minute. And these are the wires that went forward to the head. Those are all bunched together. We're going to be needing to add some stuff to that, which will include our Vtec Solenoid, Vtec Oil Pressure. Next thing I'm going to do is take these wires right here. These are for the radiator fan switch. I'm going to pull them back here. They need to reach about the same place that this ground wire does. So we're going to bring them back here, bring them out next to the ground wire, and cut them off at about the same length and add our connector there. I think, hopefully, well, looks like our radiator fan switch may go to our opposite shock tower. So we may need to lengthen that wire. So it may be that wire right there. So we may wind up having to actually add some length to it in order to get it to work. Well, let's see what we can do. Okay, our ground wire is going to reach back with no trouble whatsoever. This yellow-green wire, though, is going to the left-hand shock tower, and it's not long enough, so we're going to have to extend this wire. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this particular connector off, cut the black one off, bring the black one down to where I want it to exit, which is, by the way, right here. By the way, this is a ground wire, this solid black wire, so it actually connects right to there. So it's just looping right now from there to there. But we're going to bring our yellow-green wire down to the same point. I'm going to cut it off short right here. And now we're going to have to extend this wire in order for it to come down and reach in the same place. Now, I did not bring a yellow wire with a green stripe, so I'm probably going to have to make one. I'll find a yellow wire and just go ahead and green stripe it with a green marker and bring it to the same point. Okay, and we have our green yellow wire added in now. It also seems like we may need to lengthen this wire as well. This is our oil sensor, oil temp sensor. It's been lengthened once before. I think it's actually been replaced. We're going to go ahead and extend it a little bit longer so that it gets the signal back to the computer. So let's start off with, need to extend it about 5 inches. So start off by peeling off the old stuff. We're going to go ahead and cut it right where it was extended last time. We'll cut that section out. And we're going to add about 5 inches here, which should give us about a 4-inch stretch. Our new wire has been added to lengthen our radiator fan switch. We've also lengthened our oil sensor, so all the soldering is done. Now it's just a matter of adding in our new wires. By the way, I don't typically solder wires. I usually will use a splice and crimp it on. I find it works a little bit better, but these are kind of non-critical connections. Oil pressure is basically just an on-off switch. Same thing with the radiator fan switch. They're basically just on-off switches. It's not like it's a sensor where it is going to be working with a pulse or some small amount of electricity. So I just opted for soldering since it was a little bit easier than making a couple splices for it. All right, next thing we're going to do is add in the wires we need to add in. I have red wire for a knock sensor, a green-yellow wire for the Vtec Solenoid, a blue-black wire for Vtec Oil Pressure, and an orange-black wire for the heater control on the 4-wire O2 sensor. I'm going to go ahead and plug those in to this. Let's see, number one is going to be our green-white wire. That goes in right here. Let me make sure I get it in the right side up. And then number two is going to be our blue-black wire. That's going to go in the number 2 slot. Number 3 is going to be our red wire. That's going to go right here. And number 4 is going to be our, or number 6 rather, is going to be our heater control. So the wires are all plugged in. We need to route them through the harness now. Start off by kind of laying them in alongside the other one. Eventually we'll actually open this up and combine it a little bit better, but for the moment I'm just going to go ahead and tape it down with the others in a couple spots so we make sure it lays in properly and we get our lengths right. The first to branch off is our orange black wire. That's going to go with our O2 sensor. So we're going to bring that up alongside our O2 sensor. I'm going to go ahead and knock the plug off that one since we're not going to be using that style plug. Next, we're going to bring our Vtec Oil Pressure and Vtec Solenoid out to the end here where we have our other wires that go to the side of the head. So we're just going to bring those along and put another piece of tape right there. We're going to need to add one more wire in here because we need a ground wire for the Vtec Oil Pressure. We'll add that in just a second. Now our knock sensor wire. So that's the red wire. We're going to go ahead and tuck it in this piece of tape right here. We're going to let it come out this junction. Again, it needs to be about the same length as our oil pressure radiate light, so we'll bring it right up about there and give it a quick cut. First off, with our Vtec Oil Pressure, we need a black wire that's going to come down and it's going to connect basically to one of the other black wires that makes its way to this ground right here. So we just need to come down, find another black wire, go ahead and tap into that, and that will be good for that. We can actually go ahead and use this one right here, which is the one that we're using for our Radiator Fan Switch. So we're just going to strip it right there in the middle and then come down and connect to it. So let's find some black wire. We'll feed it up with our Vtec Oil Pressure. Bring down here, loop it back, and we'll connect it to that wire. There they are, spliced together. I hadn't used these pliers before. I actually used the largest size crimp for that, and it did a real nice job. Crimped completely, tight, good to go. little tape on it to insulate it, even though it's a ground wire, and we should be good. All right, the next wires we have to add are these wires right here. We need to add a white wire. Well, I'm sorry, this is the white wire. This is the O2 signal. We're going to need a green-white wire that is going to be a ground wire, and we're going to need a yellow-black wire that's going to be a power wire for our heater O2. So basically, this is the signal wire. This is a signal ground wire right here. This is the heater control wire, and this is a power wire. So we need to add all those wires. Okay, looking at our shock tower plug, I can see we have a yellow-black wire here. That is actually injector power. It comes from right here. And if I recall correctly, there should be another yellow-black wire over there somewhere. I may have it disconnected. That one's yellow-green, so that's not it. I may have it disconnected because normally what happens is on the DX, there's two of the yellow-black wires, and they are basically one for the primary injector, one for the secondary injector. When we do the port injection conversion, we just connect to one of those and we leave the other one off. So let me see if I've got enough wire to reach all the way over to this side of the, if I don't, no, I don't. What I'm going to do then is I'm just going to go ahead and tap into the same power wires that we use for the injectors, because those are also yellow-black power wires. So just going to go ahead and do that. Okay, we're going to use one of the red wires with the blue stripe that are actually powering the injectors. Those all connect back through the resistor box. When you normally have an OBD0 car, you are going to be running a resistor box here. So the power is going to be fed into 4 resistors, and that's going to drop the voltage for our injectors, because the injectors are not going to want to see that full 12 volts. It will actually burn up the computer eventually. But we are going to OBD1. That means 2 things. Number 1, we need 12 volt power for our O2 sensor. And since we're going to be grabbing it from here, we're not going to be running the resistor box. As a matter of fact, we're going to be running OBD1 Integra injectors. So we will be omitting the resistor box. That means all these will just be jumped together, and the full 12 volts will be getting to each red wire with the blue stripe for our injectors. That means I can just tap into one of these. If I was still trying to run the OBD0 injectors, which you can do, I would have to take this yellow-black wire, run it completely over to this plug right here, and try to find the other yellow-black wire at the harness in order to get my full 12 volts. But again, we're running OBD1 injectors that do not require the resistor box, so we're going to go ahead and just tap into one of these wires so we don't have to add a bunch more wire and further unwrap all this. Okay, the last wire to splice is our green and white wire. So seems like we have a green white wire right here. Bring that out into the open so that we can splice into it. Oh no. Well, I feel like I definitely damaged that. So let's do a little repair. Got a little aggressive with my cutting. Looks good now. I would have preferred to use a splice, but since I cut about half the wires, I figured I'd better fix it. Okay, our wires are laid in. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and reattach a lot of the split loom we had on here and tape it all back up. I'm going to wait till I have this harness on the vehicle tomorrow to kind of finish wrapping up all the other lengths, so I make sure I don't have anything that doesn't reach. I gave plenty of extra room on all of it, so I'll do the final wrap tomorrow. So let's get that loom back on here and tape this thing up. I have put my new harness on the engine, and right now I'm going to be doing kind of the final sizing of all the wiring and stuff like that to make sure that it fits on the actual engine rather than doing it, you know, this looks good enough. So I'm going to start at the front of the engine here. To start with, we've got our reverse wires, our reverse light wires. That's these two right here. So we're going to clip these off and put a compatible plug for this on there. So this is a 2-pin Obd-1 plug. Again, I'll put information in the show notes on where you can purchase these things. They're available through VTEC and cycleterminal.com. I forget exactly what model they are. They're a Sumitomo product. Sumitomo makes a lot of the Honda. Connectors. These are old and crusty. Those are male pins, so I need female. 2 of them should be fine. Insulators to go with them. Always give them a good tug, make sure they're in there tight. Which wire goes where? I'm sure I could look it up, but it doesn't really matter. All the switch does is make a connection, so polarity is not really an issue. If I look at the 2 wires, they're this, looks like they're the same color anyway, so I'm not even going to worry about it. Just plug them in, add the lock back in, reaches no problem. And normally I believe there's a bracket that hangs right here that this connects to. It's not in. I'm not going to worry too much about it. All right, next I have my Vtec Oil Pressure. That's this blue wire and this black wire. They need to reach up here and plug into a sensor that normally would go right here. This is actually a Type R Vtec Solenoid, so it does not have the Vtec Oil Pressure. I'm running an S300, which doesn't even look for Vtec Oil Pressure, or does it? I'll think about that. If it does, I'll change the sensor. Anyway, so that's going to go right there, so I'm going to go ahead and wire this in. First thing I need to do is make these 2 wires equal length. Now we will strip these and put the terminals on these. Slightly different terminal on this. Not the same as the other one. Again, part numbers will be available through VTEC, and these round plugs have this insulator to keep the moisture out. Smooth side goes on first. By the way, when I said smooth side, if you look at these little rubber plugs, they have kind of a texture on one side, smooth on the other side. The smooth side is going to stick out of the plug. Again, this is simply a switch, so polarity is not an issue with these. You can plug them in either way you want to. We're going to use a slightly different set of crimpers this time. The first time we used the iWis 1412Bs. They actually have these round openings on the ends. There and there, and those are made for crimping around a rubber insulator. We don't need that on this one, so we're going to use this. This is again another iWis product. Basically, they have just 5 different sizes of crimps. So we're going to crimp using the 2018, which is the second smallest, to crimp the wire, and then we're going to go to the 1614 to actually crimp the second set of prongs into the wire. Now I'm going to use the 1614 to crimp the second ones. That locks it onto the insulator. On again, there we go. If you look at this, you might be able to see it from there. These have kind of a roll. It's like a flat edge with a roll. And then on the back side, there's an opening. That points to the outside of the connector. and the roll points to the inside of the connector. So you can line them both up like that, slide them into their openings, and when you slide them in, they lock into place, and then you just go ahead and push the rubber seal in after that. And there's a little plastic clip that locks it in. Can't back out. All right, that one's set. Next up is our VTEC wire. That's the Vtec Solenoid. That's a single wire connector. This is our single pin connector that's going to go right here. It uses the same terminals and insulators that we use for this 2-pin plug. Grab the crimpers with the round insulator crimps. Crimped on. We put the lock on as well, and then we can plug it in. All right, so that's our Vtec Solenoid. We've got that done. Now, so Vtec Oil Pressure, Vtec Solenoid, our reverse locked out. Let's go around to the back side of the motor and work on that now. Okie doke, let's see. Next up is our O2 sensor. So once again, we have female connectors. So let's pull out 4-ish of those and 4 of the insulators. That's this set of wires right here. According to my little diagram here, white is in position 1, green in 2, orange, black in 3, and yellow, black in 4. When you look at a female connector, you look at it with the wire side pointing towards you as 1, 2, 3, 4. I started working on the distributor plug. Let's go ahead and work on that. Start off by snipping all the wires same length. On these wires, you'll notice there's 2 pairs. There's a pair of 2 pairs plus 1 extra wire. The 1 extra wire, by the way, is igniter wire, and the other 2 are sensor wires. So the igniter wire, you need to make sure it gets plugged into the igniter, otherwise the distributor doesn't work. In fact, it'll burn out the igniter. So we're gonna go ahead and cut our other wires off here. You can tell the difference, by the way, because all these distributor wires have shielding around them. See these larger wraps? That's shielding. That's to prevent there from being a bad signal, basically, getting back to the distributor. All right, so I'm going to equalize all the lengths, including my wires that I'd added for the TDC sensor. Unshielded, by the way, but honestly, I've never found a problem, so I don't get too concerned about it. So those are all correct. Now on this side right here, we have our wires for the coil and coil power and for the tach signal. So those require a particular connector. Make sure the wires are all stuffed down in there. These terminals come in 2 sizes, one for the large wire, one for the small wire. I actually have only the small wire one, so I'm hoping it's going to grip on tight enough to the wires. I'm going to do, okay, so that's crimped on. Yep, tight. Now I need to crimp on using the very large round crimp. Those are crimped on. Now I need to strip all these and wire them. They're going to use the exact same female terminals that were used there. Here's our plug that we're going to be plugging into, male plug. Here's our coil power and tachometer signal. So if we look at it, clip up, we notice one is a tach signal and number 2 is a coil power. So when we insert into our connector, we need to make sure that we match that. Looking from the wire side, number 1 is our tach signal. That's in, and number 2 is our power. Next, strip all these and put those together. actually going to do this igniter wire first in hopes that I can go ahead and put it in the plug and not accidentally confuse it with the other white wire later on in the wrapping process. So I got my A-pin connector like this. You'll notice that this yellow-green wire, that's actually the igniter on this particular distributor. It's kind of off by itself. If we look at the way it's wired, again, clip up, position number 1. That is the one we want the igniter in. So let's start off. Position number 1. It's in 1. Now all I'm going to do is match all the other colors as I go along here. Oh yeah, I'm going to have to convert these. The colors on this distributor are actually not the same as the colors in this harness. So I'm going to go ahead and crimp everything else on and then make a little wiring diagram in order to convert all the colors over. I forgot that they didn't match on this particular distributor, but easy enough to fix. Let me just crimp everything on and then we can go make a quick conversion chart for it. Okay, I took a quick break and went in and looked up the wiring. Originally I was thinking about making like a conversion for color, but that's not really necessary. I just went ahead and found all the positions of the wires. So we're going to go ahead and plug them into our connector in the proper locations. So to start off with, we have our igniter. That's in position number 1. In position number 2, we're going to put a blue-green wire. By the way, that's the TDC sensor on the OBD0 car, but they changed it over to crank angle sensor on this particular setup. So it actually changes what it's used for. So underneath that is the blue-yellow wire in position number 6. So that's there. Next on, we have orange with the blue stripe. That goes in to number 3. And then white with the blue stripe, that goes directly below it in number 7. Then next we have orange. That goes in at number 4. And number 8 is white. Oops, there we go. All right, need to put the lock in there too. Locked in. That reaches no problem, so we're good there. Next is our radiator fan switch. That's right there. Remember, our radiator fan switch changed position. It's now right here on the thermostat housing. So we need to put the same round connector on that we put on our Vtec oil pressure sensor. And then load our rubber seal in. Ready to go. Let's see if our lengthened oil pressure, it now reaches our oil sensor, so we're good there. Let's take our injectors and put them up through the center of the runners. All right, this is our knock sensor. This needs to reach the knock, which is right there. Looks like it's going to reach no problem. I might just shorten it a little bit. Yeah, we're going to cut a few inches off that. This one uses a round plug as well, although it only uses one wire. So when we plug it in, we're going to put it in the top one. That means the one nearest the clip. That's where it's going to go in. So first off, again, we'll put the rubber seal on.
If you find an actual knock sensor plug, there's actually a small plastic plug that goes in the other hole in order to seal it up so water can't get in. Probably use a small piece of wire in there. Would do the same thing. I'm going to cut off a short piece of wire. And I'm going to go ahead and use that to plug up the second hole. Into the top one. And slide our... Alright. That one's there, reaches nicely. We do have a different alternator plug, so we need to put that on. And the other plug we need to put on is a new 6-pin plug here for the jumper. This is going to be where our power wires for our injectors are going to be jumped to. Those are all going to go on. So I need to de-pin this, and I'm actually going to have to cut it off. The insulators that are on here are actually too large for our new plug, so I'm going to have to cut these off and redo them. You can see this insulator is quite a bit bigger around than these smaller ones that we use with the gray plugs, so these are going to have to be changed. Slide on my new insulator. Oh, that's a big thick wire. Pull that insulator down. Here is our new connector, along with the bus bar you can see here. This is going to connect everything together. It's a few more pegs than we had before. It's 8 rather than 6. That's okay. We'll just leave a few empty. So, I'm going to start off with position number 1. We're going to go ahead and put our power in there. That's going to be the main power. All right, and then just put each one in after that. The arrangement of how you put them in doesn't really matter, because basically all we're doing is we're connecting all of our injector powers to this single power wire right here. Once we get them all seated in properly, we'll put our clip back in, and then we plug on this bus bar, which connects them all together, and we're good to go. So let me just get everything seated properly.
Yeah, I know.
Then we can put in the lock, and we will be done. I can hear them clicking in now. All right, they're all seated. Lock goes in. And now the bus bar to jump them all together. Yeah, slouched in. Very good. Done. Last but not least is this, the alternator plug. And I'm not sure I have the right terminals for this, so we might wind up changing the alternator. So let me go grab an alternator plug and take it apart real quick and see if I have the correct terminals to work with that. These wires are kind of old and stiff, so I think what I'm going to do is give myself a little bit more room to work with by peeling it back somewhat. I also found some insulators that have a slightly larger opening. Hopefully it's big enough. Let's see, if I recall correctly, there's white with a blue stripe, white with a green stripe, and white with a red stripe. So there's white with a red, white with a green, black, yellow. That should have been white with a blue. So let's see if we can find a white with a blue. Well, these are different colors. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go look for a wiring diagram that lets me know which one goes where. Well, these are different colors. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go look for a wiring diagram lets me know which one goes where.
Much later.
After much hunting around and stuff, these color wires that I have here don't really coincide with anything. We've got a white-yellow wire, a yellow wire. Those don't really match anything on the OBD2 harness that we have. This has white blue, white red, white green, and black yellow. Now we found this other OBD0 plug and it has all the same colors, which is nice. That means that I believe we now have the right positioning for our original harness. This is our original harness. So all I need to do is take a position, match its color, then I know what its function is on our OBD2 plug. So this should help out tremendously with what I'm trying to do here. Now we're going to start off with the black-yellow wire since it's there. Actually, we're not going to. I actually have pulled out already the white wire with a blue stripe. So we're going to start with that one first. So the white wire with the blue stripe is this one right here. It's actually a white wire with a blue stripe, so that would be this one right here. So we're going to go ahead and crimp a new end on that and insert it into our plug in what should be the correct position. And snap it in a position. Okay, first one's in. Next we'll go ahead and do our black-yellow one, which we've already crimped an end on, and insert the new one in there. Clipped in place. All right. Next we'll do white-green. Or is that white-red? I'm colorblind. I don't know if you know that, but I am. That's white-green. This is white-red. We'll do white-red. Find our white-red wire. Yeah, right there. It's opposite our black-yellow wire. So it's this white-yellow wire right here. These are fairly thick wires, so I'm using the 2018, not the 2422 crimp, which is the middle one on these pair of iWis crimpers. Crimp it hard, give it a good tug, slide the insulator in, and crimp around the insulator. Shove it into our empty hole. And put it in our last. Clicked in place, and now put our lock back in. All right, alternator plug's done, and it reaches easily. Probably could have shortened it a little bit, but I didn't have a new one of these crimps or a new one of these terminals handy, so I just left it the same length it was. Okay, the last thing I need to do is the injectors. These all actually reach rather easily, so I don't need to do any more sizing to try them on. In fact, I can crimp on the injector connectors at a desk, which will be a lot more comfortable than hunched over the motor. So I'm going to pull this harness off real quick, and we'll crimp the injectors on. Oh, I had them nicely paired before, and now I don't. Well, doesn't matter. You get one wire like this and one wire like this, and that's how they get paired. Okay, so these particular terminals are the same ones we used for our OBD2 alternator. Part numbers will be in the show notes, of course. For the moisture seals, water seals as well. These particular injector plugs are actually off of K-series, but they also work for OBD1 injectors. So that's what we have on it, and that's what we're using. So another thing is if I recall correctly, the power wires always go in number 2, and this being a female connector, you look at it from the rear, interestingly enough, there's no connector side up on these. Probably the key side up. So once you do that, click it in place, power on the left, ground on the right. And it doesn't really matter which way they go in because basically they're just flowing current to your injector. So whether it in polarity doesn't really matter. So there we go, first one done. What I'm going to do right now is bring it back to my house where I can sip a beer while I finish wrapping all this thing with tape. I'm going to put some loom on some of the individual wires for a little bit of extra protection, and it'll be all done. I think I have the missing terminal at home too, so I'll grab one of those and crimp it on, and then I can wrap this all up tomorrow and install it on the motor. The harness is finally finished and on. It's all loomed up nice and pretty. Everything reaches. Some of it's a little bit tight. It probably could be worked a little bit more, but it's satisfactory. Anyway, we are done with this part of the video. The wiring is complete. Next step is to prep the engine bay on our EF so we can drop this bad boy in there. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining us for another episode, exciting, riveting episode of VTEC Academy. I hope you learned something and didn't fall asleep. Anyway, guys, please think about liking and subscribing, and we'll see you on the next video. Thank you.